We're back today with our 16th socially distant studio visit for Hallwalls Contemporary Art Center. I call them studio visits. They are kind of check-ins or pandemic diaries where we talk to artists that we've exhibited over the years and see where they're at now, what they're doing, how they're doing, and what the situation is with them in this weirdest of weird times. And today we're talking to Alicia Ross, who is in Rochester right now and who exhibited at Hallwalls in a solo exhibition in 2007, which now sounds so long ago.
It does.
Hi, Alicia. And my first question is, as with everyone, how are you?
How am I? I'm doing very well. In comparison to lots of other folks, I'm doing very well. There's been ups and downs, of course. Um, I think that honestly, I think a lot of artists are sort of built for this. So a lot of times, especially over the summer, I do a little bit of a, studio retreat where I sort of get focused and work on new projects. So in some ways, this isn't much different than what I normally do. But I also really miss my friends and hanging out and going to things like restaurants, which sounds so luxurious right now. Um, so in general, I'm doing very well.
And how are you finding things in Rochester? You know, with the sort of really nice weekend we just had, there was a lot of concern expressed by people in Buffalo of people not really being very diligent about social distancing in our main park here. So
Mhm.
that got to be a little contentious. How are you finding it in Rochester?
To be honest with you, I have not been out barely at all. I go running every day and I run out at a very large park. I have noticed that the park keeps getting more and more crowded. And a friend of mine recently said, "You're not gonna," I think it was a Saturday and it was really nice out. And he said, "You're not gonna go running today. The park's gonna look like Coachella." And I thought, oh no, maybe I really shouldn't go running. Um, but honestly, from what I hear from other folks that are going to places like Wegmans and picking up groceries and things like that, that it hasn't been too, you know, close where people are super close, that people are really like kind of staying back and keeping their distance. And um, when I have ventured out, it seems like people are being very, very kind to each other. So, which is awesome. I love to see that. And so there's a lot of stuff to get really down on right now and to feel really pessimistic. But especially in Rochester, I've seen some really nice things happen. And, people seem to be enjoying the outside a lot and walking with family and chatting. And every time I go running, I do trail running. People are, sometimes, they're all waving, and I'm assuming they're smiling because a lot of them have masks on. But they all seem very gregarious and happy to see other folks on the trail. So that's been really encouraging.
Have you been doing any remote teaching, like as the school year has come to a close?
Yes, RIT has gone completely online. That was right before spring break. So that was a big shock. I think a lot of people thought that spring break was going to be extended and then we would come back. But I think that they made a really smart move and decided to move everybody online. I actually teach new media design. So all of my classes were already digital. So it wasn't too much of a transition for my classes. Um, and I run a pretty tight ship, much to the chagrin of my freshmen mostly. So once we moved to online, it wasn't too bad. I think that at least my students kind of knew the rhythm of things, and they knew that things would be due and how to upload them and really kind of take care of the digital aspects on their end. I do feel very badly for some of my friends who teach in fine art because that has been such a you know it's just been crazy. They don't know how to translate things like oil painting, where there's so much hands-on with the students and looking over their shoulder and seeing exactly what they see. So in some ways I've been really um, lucky that my students are kind of all digital, but to see how the fine arts have really had to adapt and had to adapt really, really quickly has been eye-opening.
Have the grad students had to like get rid of, like, empty out their studios or abandon their studios completely?
Yeah, a lot of the fine art studio graduate students had to, they kind of did that, I don't know, a couple weeks into the announcement that we were going to move online. So there was kind of like this middle ground, um, where students had an opportunity to kind of get everything out of their studios that they needed. But I feel so badly for the students who have worked. I was there. I mean, I was there literally at RIT, where you work 2 years towards these shows, and to get the news that you're not going to actually do a physical thesis show must have been completely devastating. So I feel really, really badly for some of these graduate students. The graduate students that I actually work with in VCD are all digital anyway, so they didn't really have digital studio. They don't have physical studios that they had to move out of. So, like I said, the transition for on my end was actually pretty easy. Um, but there were some really awesome things that happened right up until the very end. My colleague Shane Durgee, he
Mhm.
decided that to really give the MFA students an opportunity to show their work, not necessarily to people in person, but to put up their work and be able to photograph it for installation shots, which of course are so important. So I give him a lot of credit for doing that right up until the very end. And I saw that at a lot of other universities too, where they were quickly moving and trying to figure out how they were going to show their work. And I saw, honestly, I can't think of what the university was, but they're doing like outside screenings of some of the film and animation students, and having people kind of pull up in their cars, and to see the problem solving on that kind of level has been really, really cool. And I think that, something I talked about with my students a bit, where um, the problem solving you have to do in kind of times like this really kind of gives birth to things that you didn't even think were possible, or a different way of doing things that really maybe is even better than the way that we were going about it before. So in some ways, the boredom, especially, I see so many of my students who are, I do interaction design, and I have a lot of students that are working on apps and different projects that I know they wouldn't be working on if they had a full plate right now. So the boredom, in some ways is really, really good. And people have had a chance to really sit back and, and think about and to do some of the projects that they normally wouldn't have a chance to do otherwise.
Well, speaking of proactive solutions, given that so much of your body of work has involved embroidery, I have to ask, have you been making any masks?
I really haven't. I made sure that most of my friends and family were taken care of, and I had a really kind landlord who, as soon as everything kind of started to happen, gave me a couple medical masks that honestly I haven't even used because I haven't really been out in public. But just made sure that everybody was sort of taken care of, and I did attempt one mask, but it was sort of a disaster, and I decided to leave it up to people who actually were much better and better equipped at doing them in volume. There's a man here in Rochester who's a colleague of mine, John Kelly, who's making a ton of masks for the local hospitals, and another colleague of mine, Emily Bellinger, who has been making, I think she hit 500 masks or something insane. Has been really able to pop them out and give them to individuals, people who really needed them in a pinch. So I give people like that a lot of props, because that is that's some due diligence. My technique, my practice is a little bit slower than that, a
Well,
lot
Emily
slower than that.
has made a lot of quilts, so I think she's probably really up to speed on the sewing aspect
Oh,
of things.
I've told her so many times, she knows this, but the production that she is able to turn around is, it gives me always like a little bit of anxiety. And I think that I really need to up my game and make a lot more work. It always puts me to shame for sure.
Well, what have you been making? Because I think you posted something about a project coming up.
I am actually going to be showing, in theory, I'm showing in Manhattan next month, but to be honest with you, I'm not really sure how any of that is going to turn out. I've been Skyping with the Tambrin Gallery, which is the gallery that is representing my work in Manhattan. Um, and they're very optimistic, which is awesome. and I'll be showing a lot of the work that I've been making over the last few years, which is, you see some of the work in the background a little bit. The Distress of Uncertainty is the name of the series. And so I'm optimistic. We have plans of, meeting halfway so I can give them the work so I don't have to go all the way into the city. And they've been really accommodating on that front. But I really appreciate their optimism, because I'm a bit of a realist and sometimes a little bit of a pessimistic person, a little bit. And I've been kind of hesitant. Is that going to actually fly? Are we going to actually have the show? Um, but that's what I'm working on right now. So I'm trying to stay with the idea that it's going to happen, and they're going to have the work up, I think, all the way till September. So those are pretty good shots that it's going to be up and people are going to be able to see it in person. So just been, putting my head down and trying to work on that series as much as I can.
So I was also thinking about your Phrenology series, that ongoing series of
Hmm.
portraits that you've done over the years that have been uh, primarily of women celebrities and public figures. And I think way in the background of that room you're in is Stormy Daniels, uh,
Hmm.
I think,
Yeah.
and Elizabeth Warren. I wanted to ask you if our current moment has given rise to any other subjects that might get that treatment.
Absolutely. I'm always inspired by the people that are in the media, and they become so much of our brains. We're seeing them on every single platform, Facebook, Instagram. A lot of them now are live streaming, so they just kind of pop into my feed. And um, you know it's weird, the kind of relationship that we start to have to these figures. And especially for me, I'm always paying attention to the way that the women are portrayed, how they portray themselves, how they get recontextualized and quoted. And the focus sometimes is on the way they look or the way that they're presenting themselves, and how we many times focus on those types of things and not the words that are coming out of their mouths. So I was actually just talking about this with somebody. I'm really working on multiple series all the time, and some things lend itself better to, or feelings or emotions or even situations that I'm in lend themselves better to a particular series. So this is, like you said, this is Stormy Daniels and Elizabeth Warren. These are folks, that of course are, past folks that have been into the mix, but people that stay in the mix. So I try to really focus on people that are going to have kind of long term. I find that I've done sort of phrenology series in the past that were on white, and I look back at that series, and the people that are in that series, I think, had such an impact and were really a part of the mainstream for, what seemed for a long time. But looking back, those people were just sort of blips. And so I've been trying really hard to focus in on the folks that I think are going to have a little bit of lasting power, so that, in a few years we look back and we know exactly still who those folks are. So I've been working on Greta, you know, um, and making sure that I think it's really important that she's a part of this particular series. But to be honest with you, she's sort of been in and out of the news a little bit. I think she just came in again because she was donating an award to charity. And so she started to pop into my brain a little bit more recently, and I've been working on a piece for her. And like I said, I think it's important that she be a part of this particular series. And the one thing that I've talked about with the phrenology studies is, for me at least, they're not always about the individual women, but I really think of them as a larger series, as one piece in a sense, because it's really about the play between the pieces. And that when you juxtapose, Ivanka Trump with Stormy Daniels, and you have them up on a wall, the way that those two pieces really talk to each other, I think, is really the crux of that particular series for me. Um, so folks like Elizabeth Warren, and how she would visually talk to Greta, and what kind of dialogue that would sort of evoke in the viewer, I think, is, like I said, is really what those pieces are about for me.
Yet you've never made an exception and had a male figure in that series. I mean, because I was wondering, like, would Dr. Fauci rate in importance as a figure, or is there a similar um, woman figure from our pandemic moment that kind of comes forth in your mind as perhaps a subject?
That's a really, really great question. It's something that I think about actually a lot. Male figures have actually started to come into this series, which I really, to be honest with you, we always kind of joke about in like fine art world, but the work that we make is oftentimes self-portraiture. And my work, my whole trajectory in graduate school started from self-portraiture. So a lot of times I see myself and my own emotions being portrayed in the work that I'm creating visually. Um, so I'm not really like opposed to putting men in the Phrenology series. It just hasn't been the impulse that I've sort of resonated with quite yet. Um, I don't know. I always go back to some of these folks that are really, I don't know how I want to say this. I always have a bias in some of my stuff. It has a bias for sure. But the polarized opposite side, I always think, oh, I should make a portrait of them. But sometimes I find their faces so repulsive. that sounds so harsh, but sometimes I don't think I want to stick with their faces for a good month or 3 months. So I know that sounds kind of harsh, but oftentimes I feel like I can sort of have like almost my own kind of internal dialogue with some of these women. As I'm making them, I'm, you know, maybe that sounds sort of kooky, but I'm having sort of a dialogue with them in my head as I'm spending so much time with their faces. You spend a lot of time thinking about the typographical layout of their faces, and I guess just some of these male figures, not all of them, of course. I haven't wanted to spend that much time with their faces. So.
Fair enough. I can totally understand that. You did. You also. I'm trying to remember. I didn't look back on your feed, but you did post on Facebook something that you made. It was a non-art object. It wasn't a quilt. Was weren't you making something for your home?
Oh, I was, yes. It was a quilt actually. It
Oh, it
was
was a quilt. Okay.
yeah, it was the first kind of decorative quilt that I've made. You can sort of see it actually. It's right here. It's on my couch, and it's just decorative. It was just something that I wanted to do for a while. But the one thing that I wanted to make something that was kind of almost non-art related, but still sort of working in fiber. But the one thing that I kind of realized is those types of pieces, for me at least, are really, really important because I'm able to kind of play around with techniques that maybe some of the fine art pieces haven't really allowed me to sort of indulge in. And so to play in applique, which is something that a technique that I had worked on this particular quilt, now is sort of seeping into some of these bodies. And so even though I tried to make something that was like, non-fine art, a little bit more decorative on a little bit more of a craft side, it starts to inform the other work. So they all kind of go hand in hand.
I wanted to ask about it because at a distance, it looks to have a little bit of a modernist flavor about it, even though you call it non-art.
Well, it does, absolutely. It does have a kind of a minimalist, angular design. And honestly too, it even though my fine art work isn't really kind of about angles, or it's a little bit more fluid or organic, my graphic design bent is a little bit more minimalistic and a little bit more angular. So maybe a little bit of a yin and yang on that kind of front. So it's sort of playing out in the things that are non-figurative, but the other side of my brain that works a little bit more like that coming out into the decorative pieces.
My last question, Alicia, which everyone seems surprised by when I ask it, but there's no wrong answer. They've all been good answers. Is whenever normal or whatever version of normal will be returns, what's the first thing, large or small, that you'd like to do?
Well, I saw that you were actually asking that question in some of the other videos, so I was like, pondering how I was going to answer this question. So it's something that I've been thinking about. The first thing I want to do is I want to hug my friends, which I think was maybe some of the answers that some of the other folks were saying, but it's really true. I am a total hugger. I love hugging people, I love hugging my friends, and so to not be able to do that has been upsetting to say the least, when people leave and you can't hug them goodbye. It leaves sort of a hole in your heart. So that's been sort of upsetting. So that's going to be the first thing that I do. And then as things kind of open up and we start to go back to restaurants, or just to sit around a big campfire with a bunch of friends and telling stories and having a beer, like those are the types of things that I really miss. Mhm.
Normal stuff.
Yeah, normal stuff. So what is the thing that you're gonna do? Has anybody asked you?
Well, I one thing I really miss is I was telling someone that the week that everything came crashing down, I was all set to go on a day trip, drive out to Syracuse to the Everson Museum to see a show they had up of 100 years of their collection. And of course,
Mm,
by the time that weekend hit, everything had closed. And so I really like sometimes, I'll just take a day trip to the memorial in Rochester, or I I miss being in galleries and going to museums and seeing artwork and taking a day to drive to Cleveland or something like that. Just simple stuff. Places I've been many times, but I want to go back to the Cleveland Museum. I want to go back to the Warhol
mm.
Museum. I want to go back to the Mattress Factory. These places that are kind of within driving distance of Buffalo and make for a good day trip.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
absolutely. I was actually just talking about that particular thing with a group of colleagues of mine about how you really take those experiences for granted. And as much as we try, I mean, there's folks at RIT that are doing some amazing things, trying to put things online and online galleries. It's just not the same. And I really miss, big surrounding installations that are, all encompassing of your senses, and that cannot be replicated on a screen. Unfortunately, it really can't. So I agree with you. I totally miss that kind of stuff. And I think honestly too, just being in the Rust Belt like this, I think we really take for granted the quality of museums that we have within a, like you said, a driving distance. I was really fortunate enough to go to the CMA. Yeah, I'm from Cleveland, and so to go to the CMA right before all of this shut down and to be able to see pieces up in person, I kind of got my a little bit of my fix right before this happened. So I feel really, really happy and fortunate about that. But I'm with you. I really miss going to the galleries and things.
the last day trip I took was before it all happened was to the Akron Art Museum in Akron,
Oh yeah,
which
I love
is
the Akron Art Museum.
that's
Mhm.
an amazing museum. I hadn't been to it before. They had a great show of video game art, but they have a great collection, great historical works.
Yeah.
It was a really worthwhile trip. So I was really happy that we got out there.
Oh, my friend actually, Teresa,
Yeah,
is a
I know Teresa.
curator. Do you
I
know
met.
Teresa?
Yeah, yeah.
It is a small art world. I tell my students that all the time. Everybody is interconnected. So you got to be a little on your toes about who you're talking to, because everybody knows each other. But yes, Teresa did that wonderful exhibition, which I was able to see online, but I wasn't able to see in person. So
It
I
was
was
really good. It was really astounding. It was a show that I wished was coming like to the Albright, although the Albright is closed for 2 years. But
Yeah.
uh,
Well, Teresa worked on that show for like 2 years. She worked on it for a really long time, and, I think 2 years ago, she actually came and stayed with me while she was doing some research, I think at the Play Museum here in Rochester. So yeah, I know the trajectory of that, and I know she worked really, really hard on it.
there was a Bill Viola video game in that show.
Oh, really? I
Yeah,
love Bill
I mean,
Viola.
literally a game that he made that you could use a PlayStation controller and move through the 3D environment he created, which
Oh,
was
wow.
kind of
That's
astounding. So
that is astounding. That's cool. A
that
lot
was
of these,
really,
a lot of these folks kind of sometimes I'm always amazed at what artists kind of had a trajectory in video. William Wegman had made a lot of video work, prior to all of the photographs, and you know, so it's always interesting to see how people sort of overlap some of these mediums too. Mhm.
well, thank you, Alicia, for taking a little bit of time today. It's great to see you virtually. Hopefully, it won't be too long or we can see each other in person again. But I do appreciate you taking the time to chat because it's really been important to check in with artists and see how they're doing. So thanks
Well,
again.
I want to thank you too, not only just to, to chat with me and things, but I think that, streaming artists like this and being able to check in with them, it keeps everybody really connected. So I really appreciate the work that you are doing and through Hallwalls and you guys have always been really great about that and keeping people connected and showing kind of the latest things and having the events, which I'm always, always want to go to. And I try to get to as many as I can, but not as many as I really want to, I end up going to. But so thank you though for keeping us all connected, and I really do appreciate that.
And I appreciate your time today. So thanks again, Alicia.
Thanks, John. Bye bye.
Bye.